the training for language acquisition and sheltered instruction for the school year 2020-2021. You have just watched the video about our friend Moises and got to see his struggles as a non-English speaker trying to keep up with grade level material in a second language. This training will help you have a better understanding of English learners and the stages of second language acquisition. We will go over the English Language Proficiency Standards, or ELPS, and the Proficiency Level Descriptors, PLDs, that are used to describe their English language ability. We will then close with linguistic accommodated instruction. There will be two objectives in this training, a content objective, or the what, and the language objective, or the how. Your content objective will be to utilize the English Language Proficiency Standards, or ELPS, and the Proficiency Level Descriptors, or PLDs, in your classroom and understand how to linguistically accommodate your instruction for English learners. Your language objective, or the how, is you will write a quick write on second language learning and ways to linguistically accommodate instruction to promote English acquisition. As of June 1st of 2020, the total enrollment for HEB was 23,682 students. Of those, 4,006 students are English learners, with 668 being monitored, for a total caseload of 4,674, or 19.74%. Should every English learner in your classroom receive the same amount of instructional support? The answer is no, because not every English learner is created equally. Let's look at the different ELs and their language development. Newcomers are new to the country, the language, the culture, and the school system. Those newcomers coming with little or no formal schooling will acquire the English language at a slower rate. This is due to the academic gaps within their own native language. Those coming with formal schooling will acquire English faster. These students come with developed literacy in their native language, thus facilitating English acquisition. Then you have your short-term ELs. These students may have been born here in the U.S. and they have been raised here, and they are currently working on acquiring both the social and the academic language. Then the last group of ELs that teachers must keep their eye on are the long-term English learners. These students have been English learners for a number of years. They are easily missed since they sound like their English language peers. While they have acquired the social language, they have not attained the academic language necessary to be successful on classwork and assessments. Oftentimes, we hear teachers say, these students are just not applying themselves or they're being lazy. The truth is, they lack the academic language. The following are factors that influence second language development. You have motivation, age, access to language, personality, native language development, cognitive ability, and quality of instruction. But which factors can you control in the classroom? If you are thinking motivation, access to language, and quality of instruction, then you are correct. As an educator, we can motivate students, provide them with access to language while providing them with quality instruction. Here are the stages of language acquisition. Please keep in mind that in order to learn a language, it can take up to 7 years. As we discussed earlier, the more advanced their native language is, the faster their acquisition of a second language will be. We can start with the pre-production. This stage lasts around 6 months. This stage is also known as the silent stage, as students are obviously too shy or have little to say, but they are soaking the language around them. Then they move into the early production stage, which lasts anywhere between 6 months to 1 year. Then they move into speech emergence, which lasts 1 to 3 years. Immediate fluency can last another 3 to 5 years before they reach advanced fluency. Please keep in mind that a student can move at various levels. The more support a teacher provides the students, the faster they will get through these stages. Teachers should be providing sentence stems to help students learn the structure and the grammar. The ideal classroom is one that makes students use all 4 domains in reciprocity. For example, the students can listen, then they have to respond, then they have to read about the content, then they discuss with a partner, and finally they write about their learning. That is using all 4 domains in reciprocity. I have provided a copy of the ELPS for you to review. Please take a moment to become familiar with the English Language Proficiency Standards. These standards were approved by the State Board of Education in 2007-2008. They are required by the state of Texas, just like the TEKS are. They are required in all content areas, and they help EL students become English proficient. They are tested through the TELPAS, and they are an integral part of instruction. The ELPS provide English learners opportunities to listen, speak, read, and write. They are cross-curricular, meaning that you can use the same ELPS in math, and they can also be used in reading or social studies or science, and they are K through 12. They are not grade specific because they deal with language, not a grade level. You will notice that they move from simple to more difficult skills. They are mandated under Chapter 74, and just like the TEKS are assessed by STAR, the ELPS are assessed by TELPAS. Here we have an example of the ELPS for listening. Like I said, they are cross-curricular, meaning that they apply to all content areas. And as you notice, they move from simple to more difficult skills. If you look at A, it talks about distinguishing sounds and intonation patterns of English. But if you look at I, it now moves into demonstrating listening comprehension with increasingly complex spoken English, retelling, summarizing, responding to questions and requests, and taking notes. So as you can see, the ELPS move into more difficult skills. So what are the proficiency level descriptors? Well, there are rubrics that teachers use to determine a student's English language proficiency for ongoing formative assessments in TELPAS. There are 4 PLDs. They are beginner, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high. There are 6 sets of proficiency level descriptors. That's because in reading there are 2 groups. There are proficiency level descriptors for students who are in kinder through first, and a different set of proficiency level descriptors for students who are in grades 2 through 12. The same thing happens in writing. That's because reading and writing look differently in kindergarten than they do in 12th grade. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the key features of these PLDs. A beginning student has little or no English ability. An intermediate student will have more English. Their ability is still limited. They use simple language structures, probably just sticking to present tense verbs. They do have that high frequency vocabulary and routine contexts. Then when they move into an advanced student, these students can do grade appropriate work, but still need that second language acquisition support. These students may get confused with idioms, or more advanced vocabulary will be difficult for them. An advanced high student can also do grade appropriate work, and they need minimal second language acquisition support. Keep in mind that oftentimes an advanced high student can sound like native speakers. Many times teachers do not even know that these students are English learners because of their pronunciation. But it's not the pronunciation that makes them English learners. It's their inability to use content language, to use the proper structure and grammar of the English language. And this is where teachers need to provide that support for our English learners. Here's an example of the PLDs for listening. You will see that each one of them has a description of what the students can and cannot do with the English language. For example, in a student in K through 12 within the listening portion, these students can usually understand simple or routine directions as well as short, simple conversations and short, simple discussions on familiar topics. When topics are unfamiliar, require extensive linguistic supports and adaptations. They often identify and distinguish key words and phrases necessary to understand the general meaning during social and basic instructional interactions that have been intentionally modified for ELPS. They also have the ability to seek clarification in English when failing to comprehend the English they hear by requiring or requesting the speaker to repeat, slow down, or rephrase speech. One way that teachers can use these PLDs to their benefit is by setting goals with the student. For example, if I have an intermediate student in my class, I'm going to look over to the advanced column, and those are going to be my goals for that student. Once you start implementing those goals and strategies for them to reach those goals, then those students will move up proficiency level. Here's a non-academic listening sample. Oftentimes, we teachers, we give directions to students that have nothing to do with academics. Boys and girls, I have some exciting news for you today. We are going to be going on a field trip next week. On Thursday, after the announcements, we will load the buses and be gone the entire day. In order to be permitted to go, you must have your parents read and sign this permission slip. If your parents would like to chaperone, there's a place on the form for them to volunteer. Please put this in your backpack to take home tonight. Remember, you have to bring it back signed or you will not be able to go with us. As a beginner student who has limited English ability, this is what they might have understood. Today, we are going. Thursday, buses. Day, go. Parents, parents, like, please, backpack, home, go. An intermediate student who might have a little bit more English than the beginner, this is what they might have understood. I have, you today, we are going, field trip next week. On Thursday, we will, the buses, day, to go. Parents read and sign this. Parents like to. Please put this in your backpack. Take home tonight. Remember, bring it. Go with us. Although the student understood a little bit more than the beginning student, you can see that how there are still gaps in their understanding. As you can see here, the advanced student was able to understand a lot more and probably got the gist of the conversation. They did not understand the word chaperone and possibly a couple of other ones that they may not be familiar, but this student would definitely understand what the teacher was talking about. Here we have an advanced high listener. They understood everything except for the word chaperone, and that's because it is not a very familiar or common word that we use. But this student would have understood about the field trip and probably would have been able to return the signed permission slip. As I mentioned earlier, the Texas English Language Proficiency Assessment System, or TELPAS, is what tests the ELPS. This test includes all 4 domains, which is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Each domain is worth 25% of the test. It tests students in kinder through 12th. The online test will have the speaking, listening, and reading, while the writing portion is holistically rated by the teacher. The writing samples can come from science, math, social studies, or ELA. Students will get a rating for each domain, the PLDs. They will either be beginning through advanced high for each of the domains, and then they will also get a composite rating. Now you know all about the ELPS, PLDs, and TELPAS. But how does language acquisition work? When we make input comprehensible and provide low stress opportunities for output, that's when language acquisition happens. We know that to build language, we need to have reciprocity between all the domains and between input and output. When we have students use all 4 domains back to back, they are more likely to learn the language. In addition, if you expect an English learner to respond to you, in other words, to produce output, then you need to provide them with plenty of input for them to draw from. This can include a video, pictures, a short text to read, anything that helps them get the information. The state of Texas tells us that instruction has to be linguistically accommodated. Number 1, it has to be communicated. How do we as educators make the content comprehensible to all students? What support needs to be in place so that students get the lesson? How are you communicating the lesson to the student? Number 2, it has to be sequenced. That means that the instruction is aligned to their PLD. What and how you teach a beginner is going to be different than how and what you teach an advanced high student. And the third one is scaffolded. What supports are you providing the student to lead to independence? Perhaps you're providing verbal scaffolding, procedural scaffolding, or instructional scaffolding. So in order to make instruction linguistically accommodated, we have to communicate it with the student. We have to make the input comprehensible. How do we do that? Well, you provide visual aids. You might use gestures for the students. You might use graphic organizers to help represent the knowledge. You provide clear explanations of tasks. Your speech is appropriate for that language level. You simplify the language of instruction, not the content, but the language. You build background knowledge prior to every lesson. You emphasize key vocabulary. You present vocabulary and concepts using concrete objects, pictures, or hands-on activities. And you always try to use as many senses as possible. The next thing to ensure that your instruction is linguistically accommodated is you want to make sure it's sequenced properly. You want to differentiate instruction by the proficiency language level of the student. In order to instruct a beginning student, you might have to use videos, visuals, gestures. However, in order to instruct an advanced high student, all they may need is just to clarify a couple of key vocabulary words. You want to identify activities that promote students to progress to the next proficiency level. If you have a student who is currently an intermediate, look at the column under advanced and see what do you have to do to push that student from intermediate to the advanced level. What strategies do you want to incorporate? Perhaps you want to ensure that the student uses more of an oral language development in your classroom, so you're going to implement those activities to promote oral language development. And number 3, you can utilize supplemental resources and materials. Teachers will have elevation strategies available. This will include lots and lots of strategies that teachers can use, and all strategies can be cross-curricular, so please take advantage of this great resource. The last thing to ensure that your instruction is linguistically accommodated has to do with scaffolding, or the support that you are providing the students. There are 3 different types of scaffolds. There's verbal scaffolds. This is where you might paraphrase, you might use a think aloud for the students, you might elaborate and expand on student response, and you might emphasize key points with visuals. Then you have procedural scaffolding. This could be the use of the gradual release model, the I do, we do, you do, and then you do independently. And the last one is the instructional scaffold. This is the use of cooperative learning strategies, manipulatives, you use word walls. All of these 3 different scaffolds are necessary to ensure that your instruction is linguistically accommodated. So earlier we talked about that language acquisition happens when teachers provide those low stress opportunities for output. We want to make sure that the students are using the language not just in reading and writing, but also in speaking. And we want to make sure that the teachers have an environment that supports the students and doesn't ridicule students. So number one, do not let other students ridicule their accent. Provide those sentence stems to model correct grammar and structure for the student. Provide a vocabulary bank to aid them when they are trying to speak or to write. Provide students with visuals, graphic organizers, or notes. Give them your notes ahead of time. That way they can focus on reading the notes and not taking the notes. Allow your beginner students to copy, repeat, or list. The beginner students do not have enough language, and if you see them copying off somebody else, that is okay. This is just normal for a beginner student to do. Allow partner work or a student that speaks a language to work with that student. And then try to avoid embarrassing overcorrecting. Let's look at ways that you can accommodate and modify your instruction as well as your assessments. Pictures are very helpful to an English learner. In math, you can provide them with math vocabulary cards with definitions and a picture to help them understand the vocabulary words. For a beginner or intermediate student, you might have to shorten the amount of text that they have to read. Teachers do not have time to rewrite the text, so one way that they can do this is by highlighting only the portions that will provide them with information needed to meet the goal of the lesson. In other words, leave out the fluff. Just highlight the most important parts and have the students be responsible for reading those portions. Writing is the most difficult skill to master for an English learner. So it would help if the student has some kind of template that will help him with his writing. Here you see on the left-hand side the beginner. So if a beginner student, you allow that student to talk out what they're about to write before they start writing. You might provide them with short sentence stems to use in their writing. You might allow students to copy ideas from peers. That's okay if they are beginner students, and then you might allow them bilingual dictionaries. They have to write an introduction, only one controlling idea in the body, and then the conclusion. Whereas if you go over to the right-hand side, you see the intermediate student. They are encouraged to write on familiar topics. You also provide them with simple sentence stems. You allow the use of bilingual dictionaries. Here they have to write an introduction, and in the body they have a controlling idea. They have two controlling ideas with a transition in between and then the conclusion. And then for a student who is advanced or advanced high, they have more English. You are providing grade level appropriate tasks. They have to write an introduction. In the body they have three controlling ideas with transitions in between and a conclusion. These are ways for you to scaffold or even modify your writing instruction for that student. Accommodating and modifying assessments. Please keep in mind that we cannot accommodate or modify any CBAs, any DBAs. STAR tests, they have some accommodations available. I'm talking about your short cycle assessments that you are going to provide in class. Perhaps any quizzes that you have in class, you can accommodate and modify these as well. So for beginner students, you can allow them to draw. You can allow them to point to the correct answer or provide them with yes or no questions. You can give this test orally with simplified language. And instead of having 4 answer choices, limit to 2 or 3. Have them use dictionaries. Provide them with extra time. Shorten the assessment and the test to only cover those specific skills. Do not test language. We are testing content. You can allow students to match, and you can allow students to fill in the blank with a word list. And remember, it is best practice not to fail a newcomer student due to language. Here are some points to remember. Just because they cannot tell you in English does not mean they don't know the material in their own language. Allow students to verbalize in their native language with a partner. Students need plenty of comprehensible input what's coming in, the listening and the reading, in order to produce output, the speaking and the writing.